Wyoming Territory, 1879, the wind tore through the dry grass as the sun dipped behind the Absaroka Mountains, casting long shadows across the empty land. Willow Tate stood near the edge of the corral, her fingers clenched tight around the worn strap of her satchel. Her boots were dusty, her hair loose from its braid, and her heart pounded so hard it drowned out the sound of the horses. Her father was selling her, not to a husband, not to a decent man, but to three outlaws who had ridden up from Montana with whiskey on their breath and rifles across their saddles. "He said she's healthy," one of the men said, a tall one with a crooked nose and a scar down his cheek. "And quiet." "You said quiet." Willow's father, Clyde Tate, nodded and sucked on a tooth. "She will be, just needs a little breaking in is all." Willow's stomach turned. She stepped back, but her father shot her a look sharp enough to stop her cold. He had made the trade while she was still in the house, thinking she would not overhear, but she had. And now the men were here with coin and no shame. "You said $50, Scarface said. "That's still the price." Before Clyde could answer, a fourth rider came out of the dusk. His horse was dark and lean, moving fast but quiet across the dirt. The man rode like he was born in the saddle, his hat low over his brow, a rifle slung across his back. "Step away from her," the cowboy said, voice calm and low. Scarface turned. "Who the hell are you?" "Name's Porter Shaw." Willow stared at him. She had never seen him before, but something in the way he looked at her steady, direct, made her want to breathe again. Her father frowned. "This ain't your matter." Porter reached into his coat and pulled out a thick leather pouch. He tossed it to Clyde. It hit the dirt with a dull thud. "That's $100, he said. "Double what they offered. She's coming with me." Scarface stepped forward, hand twitching toward his holster. Porter did not flinch. "You want to test me, go ahead," he said. "But you'll be dead before your hand's halfway down." Scarface hesitated. The other two outlaws shifted, uneasy now. One of them muttered something under his breath and pulled his horse back. Clyde picked up the pouch, opened it, and ran his thumb through the coins. "That's real," he said, almost surprised. Willow stared at him. "You're just going to let me go? You ain't never done nothing but cost me, girl," he muttered. "I got what I wanted, and that was it." He turned away. Willow did not move until Porter came to stand beside her. He took her satchel from her hand, gentle-like, not a word spoken, and helped her into the saddle of his horse. Then he mounted behind her and turned them toward the road. The outlaws said nothing. They watched them ride off, but none dared follow. Willow did not speak for the first mile. She sat stiff in front of him, unsure what to do, what to feel. The air grew colder as the sky darkened. Finally, she said, "Why did you do that?" "I was passing through town. Heard what your father was planning from the man at the livery. Figured someone ought to stop it. You paid $100 for me." Porter's arms tightened around the reins. "I did." "I am not worth that." "You are." Silence stretched again. Willow looked down at her hands, calloused from years of work her father never thanked her for. "Where are we going?" she asked. "There's a ranch about 20 miles west. Belongs to a widow named Mrs. Halpern. She takes in women who need a place. You can rest there." Willow's throat tightened. "So I am just another stray to be dropped off?" "No," Porter said, his voice steady. "You are free to go wherever you want, but I will not leave you with men like those." She glanced back at him, but his eyes were on the road. They rode through the night, stopping once to water the horse and stretch their legs. Porter gave her a blanket from his pack and a tin of cold beans. He sat with his back to the fire, letting her have the warmth. In the morning, the sun rose behind them, painting the land in soft gold. Willow turned in the saddle and looked at him again. "You are not what I expected," she said. "I get that a lot." Later that day, they reached the ranch. It was a tidy place, fenced and quiet, with a big barn and a windmill creaking in the breeze. "Mrs. Halpern greeted them with kind eyes and hard hands, and she led Willow inside. Willow did not look back until she reached the door. Porter was still in the saddle, watching her. "Thank you," she said. He tipped his hat. "Take care of yourself." But the way he looked at her, it did not feel like goodbye. Over the next 3 days, Willow helped with chores around the ranch. Mrs. Halpern was gentle but firm, and the other women there did not ask questions. Still, Willow could not sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw those men again. Or worse, what could have happened if Porter had not come on the fourth morning she was tending the garden when she heard hooves. She stood, heart jumping. Porter. He dismounted without a word and walked over to her. His face was dusted with road dirt and his shirt was wrinkled like he had slept in it. She stared at him. "Did you forget something? I came to see if you were all right." "I am," she said. "Thanks to you," he nodded, then looked around. "You like it here. It is safe." "That is not what I asked." Willow looked down at her hands. "I do not know what I like. I have never had the chance to choose." Porter stepped closer. "You have won now." She looked up at him. He said, "I am headed back to my land near Riverton. 40 acres needs work, but it is quiet. There is good soil. I could use help." Willow's breath caught. "You would want me there? I paid double to keep you safe. But I came back because I wanted to see your face again." Her heart beat fast. She reached up, brushed back a strand of hair from her cheek. "I do not know how to be anything but what I was." "Then let us figure out something new," he said. She smiled for the first time in days. "All right," she said. "Let us go," and when he held out his hand, she took it. The wagon rattled gently over the rutted trail west of Lander, its creaks and groans the only sounds between them. Willow sat beside Porter, the morning sun climbing slow behind them, casting long light through the cottonwoods. Her hands rested atop a folded shawl in her lap, fingers curling and uncurling like she was trying to remember how to be still. Porter glanced her way, then returned his gaze to the trail. "You ride quiet." She looked ahead. "I never learned how to fill silence just to hear my own voice." He gave a small nod. "Fair enough." They passed a rancher's drift fence, then a stream swelled with meltwater. A hawk wheeled overhead. Willow watched it until it disappeared beyond a ridge. "How long since you started working your land?" she asked. 4 years since I bought it, 2 since it stopped feeling borrowed." She considered that. "What made it yours?" "I buried my brother there." Built him a marker beneath a cottonwood and stopped looking for somewhere else to be. She didn't ask what happened. She could feel the shape of it in his voice. Instead, she said, "I don't know what it's like to choose where you belong." "You will." He said it like a promise, not a guess. By midday, they reached a rise overlooking a shallow valley. Below, a cabin stood with its back to the hills and its face to the wind. A rail fence traced the slope in uneven lines, and a lean-to shelter leaned against the barn like it might collapse if someone breathed too hard. "It's not much," Porter said as he set the brake, "but it holds through winter and keeps the wind off." Willow stepped down before he could help her, her boots crunching in dry dirt. She walked a few paces, taking in the place. The smell of sagebrush and old pine drifted on the breeze. A black and white dog trotted out from behind the barn, tail low but wagging, stopping short to sniff her boots. She crouched and held out a hand. The dog licked her fingers once before losing interest and plodding back toward the cabin door. "What's his name?" Whiskey came with the place. "Sleeps more than he guards." She followed Porter to the porch, where the door hung slightly crooked on its hinges. Inside, the cabin held a table, 2 chairs, a narrow bed against one wall, and a small cookstove that looked as though it had seen better decades. A tin basin sat beside a shelf lined with chipped crockery and bundles of dried herbs. Willow set her shawl on the table and looked around. "Where should I sleep?" "I'll build a cot for now. There's room in the loft once I clear it." "It's dry, but the stairs are steep." "I'm not afraid of climbing. Didn't think you were." That afternoon, she helped stack wood behind the shed, her dress catching on splinters and her wrists aching by the time shadows stretched over the hills. Porter worked beside her without comment, hauling and splitting with a rhythm that didn't ask for praise or notice. When the last load was done, he handed her a tin cup of water drawn fresh from the well. She drank, then wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. "You always work this long?" she asked. "If the weather holds." She leaned against the rail. "What do you grow?" "Corn and some beans. Got a few apple trees over the ridge, but they don't bear much yet. Soil's stubborn." "So was my mother," Willow said, surprising herself. The words hung there a moment before she added, "She died before we left Missouri." Porter didn't ask how. He just nodded once and said, "Mine passed on the trail west. Fever took her before we saw any mountains." They stood in silence again, but it wasn't heavy. Just the kind of quiet that settles between people who don't need to fill it. Later, Porter boiled beans and potatoes over the stove while she braided her hair by the window. The light faded slow and the wind rose, rattling the chinks in the walls. They ate at the table facing each other, spoons scraping against tin plates. Willow watched him between bites. "Why did you come back for me?" Porter didn't answer right away. He set his spoon down, then met her eyes across the table. "I've seen what happens when folks get left behind. There's a weight to it, makes everything harder." "I wasn't your burden, no," he said. "You weren't." She reached for her cup, then paused. "I don't know how to trust that." "You don't have to yet, just stay, help where you can, let the days pass," she nodded. "That I can do." That night, he laid a blanket over the cot he'd built near the stove. She settled onto it without complaint, curling beneath the quilt with her back to the room. From the corner, his voice came quiet. "If you hear coyotes, don't be afraid. They won't come close." "I'm not afraid of the dark," she said. He didn't answer. She lay awake a while longer, listening to the fire crackle and the wind skim across the roof. For the first time in years, she didn't dread the morning. Willow rose before first light, drawn from sleep by the low sound of the wind pushing against the cabin walls. The air inside was cold enough that her breath showed white in the dimness. She dressed in silence, lacing her boots near the stove where the ashes were still faintly warm from the night before. Outside, a frost silvered the grass and the edges of the fence posts. She stepped out into it, shawl tight around her shoulders, and walked toward the barn. The door creaked faintly as she opened it, startling a pair of swallows from the rafters. She had not asked permission to begin chores, but her hands itched for something to do, and the stillness of the morning gave her the space to think without speaking. By the time Porter came down from the loft, the sun had cleared the ridge and the horses were fed. He nodded once when he saw her near the pen, sleeves rolled to her elbows, hair tied back with a strip of muslin. "You always work before sunup." "Not always. Just when I don't want to sit still." He leaned on the fence. "You do well with animals. That gelding's never let me near his flank without kicking." "Sometimes they just need a woman's voice," she said. "Men tend to come at things like they need to win." He chuckled, low and brief. "Fair point." Later that day, she followed him to the south field where the soil had begun to break up after the last frost. They worked side by side, loosening earth with a pair of rusted hoes. Her palms blistered by midday, but she didn't stop. He didn't say anything about the blood on her grip, just passed her a strip of cloth and a quiet look. They broke for food in the shade of a cottonwood. Porter offered her half a biscuit wrapped in cloth, and she took it without a word. Across from her, he drank water from the canteen, then wiped his mouth with the back of his wrist. "You ever think about going east?" he asked. She tore off a piece of biscuit. "I barely remember it. Missouri was just trees and mud and voices raised too often. You got any kin left there?" "No." "And if I did, I wouldn't go searching." He nodded. "I left Tennessee when I was 17, nothing there but stone and sorrow." They sat quiet after that. The breeze stirred the tall grass and a hawk circled far off. When she stood again, he rose beside her without needing to speak. The rhythm between them was slow and steady, like the land itself. That evening, she boiled lentils with wild onion while Porter mended a broken yoke strap. She had found the herbs behind the shed, growing in the shadow of an old feed trough. The scent filled the cabin, sharp and earthy. He didn't glance up from his work until she set the bowl in front of him. "You cook like you've had to do it alone a long time," he said. "I cooked for a man who never tasted much of anything. He drank more than he chewed." He didn't answer, just picked up his spoon. After they ate, she stepped out onto the porch with a piece of thread and a needle, darning a tear in her sleeve beneath the last light of the day. Porter joined her, leaning against the post. He was quiet again, but it wasn't the kind of quiet that needed filling. She glanced sideways. You aren't a man who pushes. No reason to, folks will speak when they're ready. You always been that way. He looked out at the land. No, I learned it hard. A long breath passed between them. The sun dipped low and the chill crept back in. She lowered her needle. My father never asked me a single thing about what I wanted. I ain't him. I know. Something settled between them, then not a promise, but a weight shared. Before they went inside, she caught his sleeve gently. Thank you for not treating me like someone you rescued. He turned his head. You weren't something to save, you were someone to stand beside. She let go, but her hand lingered near his. For a breath, neither moved. Then Porter stepped inside, leaving the door ajar. Willow followed. A week passed beneath a sky that threatened rain but never delivered it. The clouds hung low most mornings, heavy and slow-moving, casting a hush over the land that neither of them disturbed. Willow spent her days mending what the wind had worn down, patching the chicken coop's wire, hammering loose nails along the porch rail, restuffing the ticking in the mattress upstairs. She moved through the work with quiet competence, never asking what needed doing, only doing it. Porter had taken to checking the fence line at dawn, returning with his coat damp and his boots caked in mud. One morning, he came in with a gash across his palm from a barbed wire snag. He didn't say a word about it, just rinsed it at the pump and tried to wrap it himself. Willow pulled the cloth from his hand. You'll tie it too tight. He didn't argue, just watched as she bound it with a strip of linen she'd boiled the night before. Her fingers were firm, sure. When she finished, he flexed his hand once, then let it fall to his side. I've had worse, he said. Doesn't mean you should ignore it. He studied her a long moment. You always fix things before they break, if I can. Even people. I don't try with people. He nodded like he understood and stepped back. That afternoon, the wind shifted from the northwest, and with it came a scent of sage and damp earth. Willow was kneeling in the garden beds, coaxing the first signs of green from the soil, when she heard hoofbeats approaching from the ridge. She stood, brushing mud from her hands, as Porter stepped off the porch and reached for the rifle hanging just inside the door. A single rider crested the hill, a woman, wrapped in a long duster, her mare moving slow but steady. She didn't carry a rifle, but a pistol hung low on her hip and her brown braids showed streaks of gray. Willow narrowed her eyes. You know her? Porter kept the rifle low. Ruth Granger. She runs cattle north of town. Used to ride with my brother. Ruth dismounted without greeting, tying her reins to the fence post before walking up to them. Her gaze passed over Willow, then landed on Porter. You get my note, he shook his head. Haven't been to town in 2 weeks. Well, you'll want to hear it now. Saw 3 riders asking after you. One of them had a scar like a crow's foot down his cheek. Rode out of Riverton 2 days ago. Willow's stomach went tight, but she didn't move. Porter's voice stayed even. They say what they wanted, didn't need to, were asking about a girl. Said her name was Tate. Willow stepped forward. Why would they come this far? Ruth tilted her head. If they felt cheated, they might want the man who cost them their deal. Porter's jaw worked, but he said nothing. Ruth looked between them. I can send word to the marshal. No, Porter said. Let them come. They won't find what they're looking for. Ruth studied him a moment longer. Suit yourself. She tipped her hat to Willow, then turned back toward her horse. If they ride through my land, I'll steer 'em the wrong way. But I won't lie if they ask straight. Willow watched her go, then turned to Porter. You think they'll come here? They might. I'm not afraid of them. I don't want you to have to be. He turned away then, walking toward the barn with slow, deliberate steps. She let him go. That night, the moon rose late. Willow sat on the porch steps, the dog curled at her feet, while inside, Porter sharpened the blade of his hunting knife with slow, even strokes. The scrape of stone over steel carried through the open door. She didn't move when he stepped out behind her, the knife now sheathed, his coat pulled over his shoulders against the chill. You ever think about leaving? He asked. Only when I didn't have any reason to stay. He sat beside her. And now, I'm still deciding, he nodded. I want you here. Not because I owe you anything. Not because I need the help, just because I like who you are when you're not trying to disappear." She turned to him. "I don't know what it means to be wanted without being used. It's not something you have to earn." They sat like that, shoulder to shoulder, watching the stars burn slow over the ridge. The wind had dropped and the quiet stretched long between their breaths. Finally, Willow said, "If they come, I won't hide. You won't have to." She leaned against him, then not much, just enough. His arm came up around her and they stayed that way, steady and still as the land settled into night. The riders came at dusk. Willow saw them first from the garden, 3 silhouettes cresting the northern ridge with the sun burning low behind them. They moved slow, deliberate, hugging the terrain like men who'd crossed hard miles with a purpose carved deep into them. She didn't call out. She didn't need to. Porter stepped out from the barn with a coil of rope in his hands, and when their eyes met, he already knew. He walked to the porch and leaned the rope against the railing, then reached for the rifle propped beside the door. Willow joined him, the wind lifting strands of her braid as she drew her shawl close. The land was quiet but not still. "They're coming straight," she said. "They want to be seen, means they want to talk before they try anything." She studied the lead man's gait. "That's him, scar down the cheek." "Same coat," Porter nodded once. "Stay behind me." "No," she said. "I won't be a shadow in this." The riders slowed as they approached the fence, stopping just past the gate. Dust clung to their sleeves and the hooves of their horses were caked in dried clay. Scarface dismounted first, his boots stirring the grass. The other 2 followed, staying back but close enough to move if needed. "You made it a long way," Porter said, voice even. Scarface spat to the side. "Didn't expect to find you planted in one spot. You came looking for her," she was promised. Willow stepped forward. "I wasn't a sack of meal to be traded." Scarface's eyes narrowed. "You were bought." Porter rested his hand on the rifle. "And now she's free. You got your coin back." "What else do you want?" "Coin don't fix insult," Scarface said. "You made us look soft in front of the men we ride with." Porter didn't flinch. "You want blood over pride, that's your choice. But you won't find it here without paying more than you lost." The wind shifted, carrying the scent of dry grass and horses. One of the men behind Scarface glanced toward the hills, uncertain. Willow stepped forward again. "You had your chance to do harm. You didn't take it then." "Why now?" Scarface looked at her long, jaw working. "You're not afraid," he said. "No," she answered. "Not anymore." He looked to Porter again, then to the cabin, the fields beyond. The dog stood at the edge of the porch, tail low, watching. Finally, Scarface turned to his horse. "You made your point," he said. He mounted without another word. The other 2 followed suit. As they rode off, their shapes folded back into the land, dust rising behind them like smoke from a fire that never caught. Willow let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd held. Porter lowered the rifle, setting it gently against the wall. "They'll talk," he said. "Let them." That night, she sat beside him on the porch, the lantern casting a golden circle just wide enough to hold them both. He ran a thumb along the edge of her palm where the callus from the hoe had begun to soften. "I thought I'd feel something more," she said. "Relief or closure. You feel safe," she nodded. "With you." He drew her hand to his chest, resting it over the slow beat of his heart. "I built this place to be alone," he said. "Didn't think there was room in me for anything else." "You were wrong," she whispered. He kissed her then, slow and careful, as though he had all the time in the world. She leaned into it, her hand tightening in his shirt, her breath catching not from fear, but from something tender and vast. The next morning they walked the boundary of the land together. She carried a sack with seed and he pointed out where the soil held best. Their steps matched without effort, and when they spoke, it was about planting rows wider this year, adding posts to the back fence, mending the hinge on the barn door before real summer heat set in. Later that season, the apple trees bore for the first time. Small fruit, tart and stubborn, but enough to line the shelf with jars of preserves. Willow stood in the doorway with her hands dusted in flour, watching Porter tie back the last vine along the fence. He glanced up at her, and she smiled, not the cautious kind she'd worn when she first arrived, but full and steady. That winter, they married in the cabin with Ruth Granger as their witness. No preacher, no paper, just hands joined and promises spoken soft and sure. After, they celebrated with stew and bread, and Ruth left them with a wink and a bottle of blackberry cordial. Years passed quiet and full. The land grew easier beneath their care. Willow kept a garden that fed more than just themselves, and Porter built a second room off the cabin. They never spoke again of the men who rode in from the north, because there was no need. Come spring, they hung new curtains and built a cradle from pine Porter shaped with the same hands that had once drawn a rifle for her. Their daughter was born on a cold morning with snow still on the ridge, her first cry rising like a spark in the stillness. They named her Clara after Willow's mother, and she grew up with dirt under her nails, a dog at her heels, and laughter in her bones. And every evening, when the sun sank behind the cottonwoods, Porter and Willow stood side by side on the porch, watching the light slide across the hills, their shoulders touching, their hearts quiet and full. Together they had made a life, not perfect, but honest, and theirs.